Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Psychology from My Kitchen. I'm Mrs. Sarah Ryan, and today in AP Psych, we are continuing with Unit 5, Sensation and Perception, and today we are looking at our sense of hearing. Now, in our last episode, we were focusing all on vision, and the really cool thing about our eyeballs is that they are capable of doing sensory transduction, but our ears can do this as well. So when we talk about our sense of hearing, the technical term for that is audition. And so sound, very much like light, is also going to come in the form of a wave, and that the different sides and shapes of those waves are what help us to determine the different types of sounds that we are going to hear. So when it comes to the amplitude or the height of my wave, that not the height. We were talking about height. So the height of my wave is referring to how loud a sound is. So the higher the amplitude, the louder the sound. And then the wavelength is talking about its frequency. And so that my shorter wavelengths are going to give me my really high pitched sounds, and my lower wavelengths are going to give me my low pitched sounds. So if you think about the difference between in a choir, a soprano and a bass, that your soprano has those shorter wavelengths, the higher frequency, the bass has the lower wavelengths. Decibels are a unit of measurement that we have used to determine the amount of sound energy that anything is giving off at a particular time. And so when we measure sound, we're measuring it in the form of a decibel. This is something that human beings have created to measure sounds. But we also know that prolonged exposure to loud sounds is going to be one of the main reasons that produces hearing loss in individuals. And that we've actually determined that anything that is above 85 decibels is going to begin to produce hearing loss. And then I typically ask my students, well, what would you assume is about 85 decibels? And they give me all kinds of responses. But you could equate it to be standing on like a busy street corner and with traffic and things like that. That's about 85 decibels, which really isn't all that loud. And so when people are making arguments to you about like having your headphones in and the music is really loud that you're listening to, you're not going to experience hearing loss right away, but you will experience hearing loss later on in your life. And that can have really serious consequences. So when we talk about decibels and how loud something is, know that 85 decibels is really the magic number. So my sense of hearing, hold on, let me see if this is there we go. So my sense of hearing, of course, is going to focus all on the ear. Now, ears are kind of, funky looking. And when we think about the ear, we almost always exclusively think about the outer skin cartilage of the ear and forget that there's this whole inner workings that are going on. So your ear is actually divided into 3 subsections: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. Now, your outer ear, of course, is going to include the outside cartilage that is shaped in a way to cup sound waves and bring them into your body. Okay, so that's why your ear is shaped the way that it is, and that having 2 ears on either side of your head is what helps you with location detection of sounds. Human beings are actually very good at being able to identify the location of where a sound is because of how the sound would hit one ear before it hits the other, and you being able to tell that the sound, is in this particular direction to you. So we have the outer ear with this cartilage, but then the outer ear is also going to include, this is your auditory canal, okay, or your ear canal, as we might refer to it. This is, of course, what gets gross earwax and things like that built up into it. And then we are going to hit the segment that goes between my outer ear and my middle ear, and that is my eardrum. So we know, of course, that sound comes in the form of a wave, but those waves are going to create vibrations. And so a drum, very much like a drum that you would have in marching band or something like that, tap, 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 is going to create those vibrations. That's going to begin this whole chain of events that goes through in my ear. So if I look down at this diagram right here, you can see the sound waves are going to hit my eardrum. They're going to make my eardrum vibrate. Those vibrations are carried by the three smallest bones of your body. These bones are known as the ossicles, and they are the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Those are the three smallest bones of your body, known as the ossicles, hammer, anvil, and stirrup. So they are carrying those sound vibrations into what's going to become the inner ear. And so here, I'm going to have now my difference between my middle ear and my inner ear, and that's at the start of what's known as my oval window. My oval window is at the beginning of my cochlea. Your cochlea is shaped kind of like a snail, okay, so you can see that kind of snail shape right there. And your cochlea could be equated in your eye to your retina, because it is your cochlea's responsibility for creating sensory transduction. And it does this through a series of hair follicles and fluid. So if we look in the cochlea, we can see that it is in this tubular type of shape, and it is full of a fluid known as the basilar membrane. When those vibrations are going to hit the oval window is going to make the basilar membrane, the fluid in your cochlea, move, okay? Kind of like waves, creating waves. And your cochlea is lined with hair cells. And these hair cells are going to line the entire circular aspect of the cochlea. And when those hair cells are in the basilar membrane is going to make the hair cells bend. Just kind of like seaweed on the ocean floor, okay, that they are going to bend. And it is that bending motion that creates sensory transduction. These hair cells are what could be equated to the rods and cones in your eye, if you want to think about it that way. And they can become damaged. So remember how we talked about those loud sounds? Well, a sound that's really loud is going to create a really rough vibration, making your eardrum vibrate more. That's going to then create the ossicles vibrating more, and thus the basilar membrane vibrating more and creating bigger waves. Well, think about the difference between like the gentle rain and the hurricane out on the ocean. Really loud sounds start producing that hurricane, and that your hair follicles in the basilar membrane can become damaged. They can break. And if they break, there is no regrowth. Okay, this is all that you get. And that is one of the major forms of hearing loss that is going to be created, that you have broken those hair cells inside of the basilar membrane, inside the cochlea, and now you can't hear anymore. One of the biggest indicators that you've done this is if you go somewhere that's significantly loud and you leave and you can't hear very well, like your hearing sounds fuzzy, or you might even hear like a high-pitched sound in your ear, like a ringing in your ear. That is the damage that is being done to your cochlea, and so some pretty serious consequences. So my cochlea then, of course, is going to be attached to nerve fibers. These are my auditory nerve fibers. They're going to go back into my brain, attached to my thalamus, and my thalamus is going to send them on their merry way. Now, loudness and being able to detect loudness depends on the number of hair cells in your cochlea that are being activated. And so loud sounds sound loud to people with normal hearing as well as people who are hard of hearing. Because even if I'm hard of hearing and that I have difficulty being able to hear, that if you're activating all of my hair cells in my cochlea, I'm going to still perceive that sound as being loud. So you might have a grandparent, for example, who is hard of hearing, and you start yelling to try, to help them hear, and they're like, "Why are you yelling? And why are you're being so loud?" And it's like, "Well, what do you mean you're being so loud?" Like it's because you're still activating all of those hair cells. Now, we have a couple of different theories about how we detect pitch. So those high sounds, that high frequency vibration, low frequency type of vibration. So our two theories are known as place theory and frequency theory. Place theory is going to make an argument that you hear and you perceive the different types of pitch based on where, or the place inside of the cochlea where those hair follicles are going to start bending. And that the area closer to the oval window is where I'm going to start detecting high pitched sounds. And that as we go deeper into the cochlea, that's where I'm going to produce, or I'm going to perceive my low pitched sounds. There's some argument to this based on the fact that we know as people age, their ability to hear high pitched sounds is going to decrease tremendously. For example, I know when I first started teaching and like cell phone use in the classroom was kind of the newer thing, that some students would have a different ringtone for their cell phones that was a really high pitched, it was called a mosquito sound. And the idea was that, you had these old curmudgeon teachers, they wouldn't be able to hear your cell phone because they can't hear these high pitched sounds. Of course I could because I was still young. But likewise, different types of stores and businesses use this on the flip side for kids. So like if a certain store or business has younger people who are kind of loitering, they're causing problems in their stores, it's been reported that they might pipe in those kinds of high-pitched sounds that are really annoying to a younger person who's there not spending any money, whereas an older person wouldn't be able to detect them. So that's the idea behind place theories, where in the cochlea we are activating those hair cells. But we're not 100% sure, that's why it's a theory. So our other theory about how we detect pitch is called frequency theory, in that it's talking about the number of it's the number of action potentials that we are creating, and that high-pitched sounds create more action potentials than low-pitched sounds, and that's how I'm able to perceive my different forms of pitch. The thing about audition and noise is that it is by far a sense that can have the most impact on our behavior, in that when we are in noisy surroundings, we know that people work less efficiently. We are much more likely to create errors, and that it can really detract from our alertness of tasks. And this is especially true when the noise is stressful, or it's something that's unanticipated, or something that I can't control. And so this is actually how we know like your coworker who is playing music in their cubicle that you don't have any control over, and it's music that you don't like, or it might not even be music, maybe they're yakking on their phone or something, that becomes really stressful to people. And so having like noise canceling headphones, or using headsets and things like that, so that you are limiting the amount of sound that other people are going to hear in your surroundings, that can actually be very, very helpful. Think about like the crying baby on an airplane, that baby starts crying and everybody starts getting stressed out because of it, and wanting to make that stop, and that's the power of sound, that we are very much in tune with what things sound like, and that sound can really affect our overall behavior. Now, I mentioned earlier about hearing loss, and that we have two different forms of hearing loss that we identify, what's known as conduction hearing loss and sensory neural hearing loss. I actually already described to you what sensory neural hearing loss is, because that's the hearing loss where we kill off those hair cells in your cochlea. That this is very common to have happen with age, that as I expose myself to more and more loud sounds as I go through my life, that I'm going to increase my likelihood of becoming hard of hearing, because I don't have as many of those hair cells. That again, once we destroy them, they're going to remain dead. They do not regenerate themselves. However, the other form of hearing loss is less common, and this is conduction hearing loss. This is where a conductor of my hearing, a mechanical system in my hearing, is going to become damaged on its way to the cochlea. So these are people who have damage to like their eardrums, for example. They might have damage to the ossicles. That can happen for a variety of reasons. We know that, for example, your eardrum, if it is exposed to a significant amount of pressure, like in an explosion, that the eardrum itself can burst. And when that happens, if I don't have an eardrum, I can't convert those sound waves into a vibration. And so I become deaf. I have conduction hearing loss because one of the conductors to my sense of, or to creating a neural impulse is going to be damaged. Then again, just like vision, if I hurt my head, if I'm hurting my temporal lobes where I have my primary auditory cortexes, that can also damage my ability to hear and where I process hearing. This whole element of becoming deaf is actually a really hot topic type of issue because of something known as deaf culture. People who are able hearing, that they have the ability to hear, often don't realize or recognize that individuals who are born without the sense of hearing have their own culture that goes along with being deaf culture. And deaf culture actually has its own elements of culture, specifically language, and that people who are deaf are going to participate in sign language, and sign language is a language. This becomes an issue when we talk about people who experience a cochlear implant. Cochlear implants are relatively newer devices that are predominantly implanted in children to mimic the effects of creating a neural impulse. You might see people who have cochlear implants because you will see a device that is implanted on it would be behind the ear and immediately on the skull. It's a square and a circular kind of element that you would see implanted. And what's going to happen is that device is going to actually create those vibrations and hook up immediately to the auditory nerve and is acting as the cochlea. That is why it is a cochlear implant. Now, what a person hears with the cochlear implant isn't exactly the same as natural sound. It actually has a kind of a mechanical sense to it, kind of like talking through a microphone. But the problem with all of this becomes people who argue that children who are given cochlear implants are being taken away from the culture that they have in being deaf and engaging in their language as deafness, and that, of course, is sign language. Also an argument that deafness isn't a disability, that I am still abled because I have linguistic ability. It's just that my language is different than spoken and hearing language. And this, of course, also goes into an argument between a person who is disabled versus referring to somebody as a person with a disability, and in how we treat those who are not able-bodied versus being able-bodied. I don't have any answers, of course, to this about deaf culture, but that is an element that we experience. So in our next episode, we're going to start looking at our other 3 sensory systems. Until then, thank you for joining me.